This is Caitlin McDonough Mckenzie and her plant love story, Low Elevation Alpine Love.
I fell in love with alpine plants at the bottom of a mountain. In college, I worked in environmental education at a backcountry hut in New Hampshire's White Mountains. Many of these huts were high mountains. They were perched just at tree line for beautiful hikes through alpine communities with Sound of Music style views of open summits all around. My hut, Zealand Falls, was not high mountain hut. Our elevation was 2,700 feet, and we were surrounded by lowland trees like paper birch and striped maple. But Zealand Falls had waterfalls. During the midday lull of my job, in the post-breakfast quiet, when all of last night's guests had hiked onto higher peaks, and all of that night's guests were still trudging up the trails below us, I would spend hours exploring the Zealand River, lounging in the rills, and climbing the falls. Little clumps of buttercup yellow flowers clung to the moss-covered rocks in the middle of the falls, mountain avens, or giampecki. In New Hampshire, mountain avens belong to much higher elevations. These rare plants have a truly weird post-glacial distribution. They are endemic to White Mountain alpine zones and coastal Nova Scotia. They belong to the high mountain huts. They're not inland valley forest plants. I noticed that the mountain avens didn't grow along the banks of the Zealand River or in the forest around the hut, only in the waterfalls. They seemed to know what I knew, that the falls were a cool retreat from the July heat. Living with the mountain avens and spending the summer with their waterfall microclimate made me feel like I had a secret alpine plant pet. Years later, as a grad student, I returned to the White Mountains. I had plots full of mountain avens to monitor clustered around those high mountain huts. And in the post-breakfast quiet, I would grab a leftover muffin, walk out the door while the college hut crew wrapped up washing the dishes, and settle in against a glacial erratic to record flowering across my plots. I'd add another season of data to this long-term project that was monitoring the ecological impacts of climate change on alpine plants. The low elevation waterfall avens were not a part of the study design, and when I started my PhD, my dissertation research shifted east to Acadia National Park, a dark spot in the mountain avens disjointed range map. But I always tried to visit my waterfall avens in the off-season. I would hike the familiar trail into Zealand Falls, one time dragging my lab mates along with me through November snow flurries the day before we had a conference in the valley. Now, as a postdoc, my alpine plants are more abstract. I collect sediment cores from ponds at high elevations across New England and sift through the mud. For the last 15,000 years, these ponds have kept a record of the plant communities that grow along their shores. As leaves and seeds and pollen fall into the water, they're trapped in the mud at the bottom. I'm sorry. I'm doing the same thing I did before, where I'm suppressing a laugh and then I get like a crazy throat thing.
So, Caitlin, you were telling us about what happened to the seeds and
leaves and seeds and pollen fall into the water, and they're archived in the mud at the bottom. My research aims to read this archive and to trace changes in the plant communities over time. Because if we can reconstruct how these alpine vegetation responded to past warming events, maybe we can get a better handle on how these plants will respond to future warming. I'm going to be okay. Okay. This project is very new. I haven't even started to look at the pollen that's in my pond cores yet. But I know that it's really unlikely that I'll see mountain aven pollen. Mountain avens are too rare and they are insect pollinated. The wind pollinators are so prolific, and spruce and fir trees that grow at tree line are so common. Even if a few rogue grains of mountain aven pollen did fall into one of my ponds at some point in the past, they're probably swamped by contributions from other species. In my student kit, which is a box of pre-made microscope slides to help me learn all of my pollens, there is no mountain aven slide. But I've found mountain avens in unexpected places before. Of course, the real question isn't, will I find mountain aven pollen in a slice of pond sediment from 8,000 years ago? The real question is, will my daughters, and someday their children, be able to hike to a high mountain hut in New Hampshire and see mountain avens or any alpine plants? What species will they fall in love with at a low elevation waterfall? And will they have to spend their careers documenting the probability of its extinction? Thanks.
Thank you, Caitlin.